Well, to get his take on the decision of the North Gauteng High Court, I'm joined by Lawson Naidoo. He's the Executive Secretary of the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution. Thanks very much, Lawson, for joining us. Now, do you think that the decision that was taken by the High Court was correct legally?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much. Indeed, I think Judge Matojani's judgment that was delivered this morning is a very clear and unambiguous judgment and an interpretation of the law, which basically says that the medical parole appeal board is the final arbiter in terms of whether or not medical parole should be granted, and that the National Commissioner of Correctional Services had no lawful authority to second-guess the decision of that parole board, and therefore the decision taken by Mr. Arthur Fraser was unlawful, unconstitutional, and has been set aside, meaning that Mr. Zuma is now ordered to return to a correctional facility to complete his sentence.
Yeah, now, of course, we've heard that Mr. Zuma's legal team have filed an application to appeal against this decision, and they argue that it's very likely that a higher court would make the opposite decision. What's your view on that?
Well, I mean, I think firstly, the very fact that Mr. Zuma's legal team are appealing this judgment comes as no surprise to any South African. We've become accustomed to this over the last 12 or 15 years, where Mr. Zuma has used every legal trick in the book to avoid justice. And therefore, one could have expected that this matter will go and appeal to the Supreme Court. And no doubt, if he loses there, he will rather ironically take the matter on appeal to the Constitutional Court, which, let us not forget, was the court that sentenced him to 15 months imprisonment in the first place.
Yeah. This filing of an appeal, does it mean that Mr. Zuma is not duty-bound to return to jail, or he very well must go back to jail in the interim?
Well, the normal course of events is that once an appeal has been formally lodged, then it has the effect of staying the order of the court from which it is appealed. So it does indeed mean that Mr. Zuma will not be required to return to prison immediately, but may have to do so pending the outcome of that appeal. So the effect of the appeal is to suspend the order for now.
Right. So, of course, we know that there's going to be a lot of political backlash around this decision, and especially given what happened in July with the violence that started up initially in support of Mr. Zuma, but then, of course, turned into something else. To what extent do you think we need to be concerned about that matter?
Well, I think we should rightly be very concerned about the a public disorder backlash, as we saw in July, that caused huge damage and incredible loss of life in South Africa. And one hopes that the security services and the law enforcement agencies are ready for any recurrence of that threat of public disorder and violence. But we cannot be held hostage to those threats of public violence in terms of ensuring that the rule of law is indeed obeyed. And I think this judgment today is an affirmation of the rule of law. And the court specifically said that Mr. Fraser's argument that part of the reason that he took his decision was to avert further violence, that consideration had no place in making a determination on medical parole. And that was one of the grounds on which Mr. Fraser was deemed to have acted unlawfully.
And just in terms of what happens next, of course, the appeal is going to hold off Mr. Zuma having to go back to jail right away. But assuming that a higher court does decide exactly what was decided today, what happens next?
Well, the first hurdle for Mr. Zuma's legal team to overcome is to secure leave to appeal. It's not a right of appeal. You apply for leave to appeal, and I think on the strength of this judgment, the Supreme Court may well say that there are no prospects of success on appeal and therefore dismiss the application for leave to appeal. That's quite likely, I think, given the strength of this judgment that was handed down this morning. And, contrary to Mr. Zuma's legal team, Having read the judgment, I can see very little reason why any other court would come to a different conclusion. The law is quite clear, and I think Judge Majutane has explained the application of that law very clearly in his judgment.
And very quickly, if indeed the same decision is arrived at, any repercussions for Mr. Fraser?
Well, you know, he would have been deemed to have acted unlawfully. We now know he has vacated office. But, you know, his reputation is in further tatters now because he's seen once again to be doing the bidding of Mr. Zuma, as he did when he was at the State Security Agency.
Thank you very much. That was Lawson Naidoo. He's the Executive Secretary of the Organization for the Advancement of the Constitution.